When you get through the door after a day of work and you whip off your shoes and that relief, it actually feels positive in the moment. But really, your feet are telling you, we didn't like that, but everyone wears shoes. So I'm not going to admit that I've got a problem because everyone wears shoes. So I'm not going to say, I can't blame my shoes, right? But actually, footwear is the problem. And there's a whole other world out there. And not only do you get to rebuild that connection between your sensory receptors in your feet, which you didn't even know you had, you even find out that you've got loads of muscles in your feet that you didn't know you had, that you start to move differently.
Today's conversation starts from the ground up, quite literally. I'm joined by Brittany Balinski, better known online as Barefoot Brit, a mum of 4, barefoot shoe advocate, and the founder of barefootbrit.co.uk, home to the UK's first barefoot shoe and foot health expo. Brittany's become one of the leading voices in helping families rethink what they put on their feet, from toddlers taking their first steps to adults rediscovering natural movement after decades in restrictive shoes. In this episode, you'll hear how her own parenting instincts led her to question what normal shoes were doing to children's feet and why that simple question changed everything. We'll talk about what really happens when we block our feet's natural movement and sensory feedback, why so many children could be labelled as clumsy but might just be wearing the wrong shoes, and how reconnecting with the ground beneath us can transform balance, confidence, and lifelong mobility for us and our kids. So whether you're a parent, grandparent, teacher, or simply curious about how something as small as your shoes could shape the way you move through life, this one's for you. Let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Barefoot Brit. Welcome, Brit. I'd love it if you would start to tell us how you started your journey with Barefoot.
It was when I was a new mom. My son was just starting to cruise along the furniture and it was time to buy him some shoes. And I just didn't feel comfortable doing what everyone else does. We all go to that very famous shop on the high street looking for first shoes. But having already had nephews, I was kind of already leaning toward doing something differently. I like to do things differently. I was doing things very naturally and very differently anyway. And so I started to look online and I discovered the concept of basically keeping babies barefoot for as long as possible. And then eventually I found or stumbled on the concept of barefoot shoes. And yeah, I really liked the concept. It really aligned with what I was already doing as a mom. Baby-led weaning, for example,
right?
Extended breastfeeding, baby wearing, and it just kind of went with all of that. And I was also doing elimination communication, which is a form of using potties basically from a really early age. So I just loved the concept of barefoot shoes because it felt really natural. And so I researched it to death and just absorbed all of that knowledge. And then eventually I bought a pair of wildling shoes for my son. And when they arrived, I loved them. But the actual funny side to it is when I was looking on the Wildling website, I saw in the menu on the drop-down box that they had like an adult section. And if those listeners know who they're listening to right now, they will probably find it really amusing to think that when I looked at the adult section, I proper sniggered and I was like, who in their right mind would buy shoes like that? You know, that was my
really.
And I'm not going to lie, and that's what makes, I think, now my content now quite relatable, because I get it. I totally understand why they can feel a little controversial and a little bit, you know, they're not going to catch everybody at first sight because they are unusual looking. So it wasn't until, and this is what I say to people, don't knock it until you've actually tried it, because we all have a little giggle at first.
Yeah.
And then when my son's first shoes arrived, it was almost like the shoes sell themselves, like the whole concept sells themselves. So I put them on him, and obviously feeling them and how minimal they are, it was just a no-brainer. It's such a logical shoe. Like, why does a shoe need to be so overbuilt and heavy and thick and full of all of this artificial external support? So when they were on him, I just thought, you know what, actually, that makes so much sense. Why does a shoe need to be anything more than this? Let's go and have a look at that website again. And I clicked on that adult section and I looked at it with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And it was that was the turning point. It's almost like until you've actually got a barefoot shoe, either in your hands or on your feet, you just don't quite connect the dots. And so literally within a few days, I'd already ordered a pair for myself and then eventually my husband. And you get them and you think, why am I wearing shoes like that? You go and you open the shoe cupboard and review all of your collection. And obviously,
Yeah.
I speak myself as a woman, I had a lot of shoes, and I look back at that collection and think that collection was so big. And I don't believe it's because I've got a thing for shoes. I don't believe it is that. I think it's because every shoe we buy in good faith, thinking these are the ones that I'm going to love, and they're going to be comfortable, and they're going to make me feel good.
Mm.
But every single time we then go into a shop, we think maybe it's the ones on it. Maybe I just didn't get it right. My feet didn't work with those shoes. It's my feet. I've just got this kind of feet, like they hurt my feet and it's my feet. And we blame our own feet every step.
And that's interesting because you've got the ability as an adult to express that.
Yeah.
But your child, and particularly your toddler, who's not even potentially speaking yet, can't. And if I had had this knowledge when I had younger ones, which I didn't, it would be interesting to see them express that comfort or discomfort by putting them in the shoes that you chose, but also comparing it and putting them in some other more standard shoes and seeing how they express themselves. And that would be completely through their body, because they can't say anything, or they may feel annoyed and try and pull them off or something, but how they then walked would be really interesting if they were completely not used to it. And that then obviously translates to the same in adults, but because we've become so desensitized to what normal shoes do to the way we then move, not just how it feels on the foot, but how we move, it has huge ramifications, which we'll come on to. But I'd love for you to tell me a bit more. Did you ever put your little ones in more robust and I would say restrictive shoes, or did you literally never, and it's been sort of hard and fast rule ever since? You have 4 children, don't you? So
I do
all
have
of
4
them.
children now. Yeah. So in my experience, and I don't think it's an unusual experience to see how children communicate their discomfort, and I think it's a training process that we don't even realise that we're participating in when we put children in shoes and socks or anything really. We struggle to get children to wear those things because it is unnatural and it feels wrong for a child. And I think nowadays maybe we're having a little bit more acceptance with listening to toddlers, especially those that are displaying neurodivergent attributes. But I think all toddlers actually do communicate quite well that they're not happy with things going on their feet. And the reason for that is their brain is immediately alarmed that they're having something blocked and shut off. And so, yeah, I did experience my children rejecting. We bought some, in fact, infant Converse are not actually the worst shoes in the world. There are far better that I've come to learn, but, you know, from classic brand. Also, Clark's pre-walkers and Start Right, they're not the worst shoes, but I think children as a whole don't like to experience that sensory restriction, and so they do exhibit and they communicate that with us by removing them, and then we enter a cycle of frustrated parenting, and we then put them back on, and then we really force them, and basically we train the children to ignore that innate frustration and desensitized, and we literally teach them to become desensitized, and that is a tragedy, and I've come to learn that it's such a shame. But that's why barefoot shoes are so wonderful, because you have less of that and you have less of a battle. And now that I've got quite a big audience and I communicate with so many families on a daily basis, I see classic stories come up time and time again where I've heard, and in fact one I remember very, very prominently in my mind in the early days of me being Barefoot Brit, and I was teaching people about what barefoot shoes are and why they're good for children and adults, of course. But in this specific instance, one parent came to me and they said, look, I laughed at your content at first, but I watched, you know, really interested, because I really felt like there was just something about what you were saying about these shoes. And my son, I feel terrible, but I've always called him clumsy because he has just been that character. And I watched your content on TikTok and over a few months, and then eventually I just caved and I bought him some of the shoes that you recommend. And it was like an epiphany. He's no longer clumsy. He doesn't fall so much. And it was like, it's just such a shock to feel that that's an experience of actually not just that family. Children are so in tune with their bodies. And when we put them in footwear, we break that connection. We have a massive disconnect between our feet and our brain. And children literally walk and move differently in those scenarios. And we, as parents, as a society, shoes are normal. We have to wear them. We teach them that that's what we've got to do. And as a result of being put in regular footwear, this child had basically adopted a persona of being a clumsy person. And his whole character was built around that. And it wasn't until this lady just fell upon my content and actually gave it a go. And, you know, that's quite a big commitment, a big step, and changed his footwear. And I feel terrible because I can feel the guilt that she would have experienced in that, but she didn't know any better. We always, as parents, we try and do our best.
You don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely nothing against her, but that's what makes me continue to post content every day, is so that I can reach people that otherwise wouldn't have fallen upon a natural type of footwear. And that is what makes my job now so incredible, that I actually get to introduce people to the concept of barefoot shoes who would never have come across it. Because I mean, I was 27 when I found out about barefoot
I was
shoes.
in my 40s. Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah.
And there's a whole other world out there. And it, not only do you get to rebuild that connection between your sensory receptors in your feet, which you didn't even know you had, you even find out that you've got loads of muscles in your feet that you didn't know you had, that you start to move differently. And then you can't help but become evangelical about it. And, you know, you want to go and scream from the rooftops and change all your children's footwear and your whole family. And then you become a micro-influencer because you can't help but talk about it, because it really is so powerful to unlock that knowledge.
Well, so interesting you say, because you do feel like everyone needs to know this. This is really important.
Everyone needs to.
My body feels better for this. And likely your brain is going to be responding better to all sorts. So obviously I don't work with children, but and I work with sort of midlife plus people, where potentially if they have been wearing restrictive and certainly thick soled, even padded, I think people have this thing, well, padded's okay. No, it still means that you're not getting the sensation of the ground at all through the sole of your foot. And so many people still are wearing slippers at home because the floor is cold. You know, there's always a reason why not. Or they have, their foot has become so sensitive to being barefoot that it's actually really quite painful. And so then when they transition into barefoot, so in my content, I don't obviously talk about it anywhere near as regularly as you, but when I do, I always talk about the importance of transitioning so that you can start to sort of bring that sensation down from sort of, for some, screamingly quite uncomfortable down to normal, and then to my level, which is quite pleasurable. I like to feel the texture of the ground under my feet. But let's talk a bit about that connection between the feet and the body and the brain, because I think that is not as well understood as it could be. And I think it's a really critical part of understanding why your footwear influences you in the way it did for that young boy, and hopefully will be a great influence on him for the rest of his life. So if you can describe a little bit about what goes on when a foot touches the floor and how that affects the body, that would be really useful if you feel okay to talk about that.
Our feet are our foundation, you know. I think that we have had this notion of like, we need footwear for our feet to function, and I really don't understand that concept, because if you look at a foot and its actual mechanics inside it and how many bones we have and how many muscles we have, like, I think a lot of people probably recognize that we have a lot going on in our feet, but we mistreat them by covering them up all the time. But you wouldn't buy a tripod and then keep the legs closed. And when we have our feet in a regular shoe, like a very narrow tapered shoe, we are effectively having two closed tripods at the end of our legs. And a lot of misconception is that feet are for walking, but actually they're not at all. I would go as far as to say you could probably still walk without your feet. But what your feet are for is for that stability, that foundational grounding, and that balance, that, and everything works together. And so if you're blocking its basic function, your body then has to compensate by utilizing other muscles, other resources, which is why people end up with niggles in their back and their knees and their hips, and it literally knocks everything out of balance. So I encourage people to look at barefoot shoes, or just even go and look at their own shoes and question, are their shoes helping their feet function in their basic, most natural function, or are they hindering? And what I have come to learn is that a lot of footwear we purchase are actually removing the workload off our feet, and they're providing external materials, weights, and shape to actually do the job of the feet that our feet are more than capable of doing naturally. So when it comes to barefoot shoes, we're actually allowing our feet to maintain a natural posture and natural position. The big toe is just such a key aspect in all of this, because most shoes, I think it's a very, very high percentage, like 90% of shoes, push our big toe. Like they disposition, it's in a complete disposition. So you end up displacing that toe, which has a massive impact on the arch because it's literally connected. It's the very next thing it's connected to, even, which then goes up into the Achilles, into the calf, and on and on and on. And so all because of that toe. Yeah. So if you're wearing a shoe that's pushing your toes together and holding them, you're losing that stable foundation. You're losing that full range of motion connected to the plantar fascia, and it just baffles me just how much we don't know that that's what our shoes are doing.
And I would add to that about the necessity for, because that big toe is so crucial for our balance. So when people have big toes removed, the main issue they have is that difficulty with balance. But one of the main things that we need that big toe to do is to be able to bend. And yet when you're in a stiff-soled shoe, and particularly when the angle, as you say, is pushing it towards the second toe, it doesn't need to bend. And then when you're in a position, for example, which I see all the time, where people are trying to get off the ground, it's very difficult to get off the ground without that bend in that toe. Wow. And therefore people then start to say, well, I can't get off the floor. And it could be as simple as getting that big toe working again. So it's incredible how something that's seemingly so small has massive ramifications for your life.
Wow. So my father is in his mid-70s, and I have a series of videos on him and his progress and basically his journey into barefoot shoes. And it only took me 7 years to get him on board with the concept of wearing.
That's quick.
He has terrible feet. I mean, it's a generational thing, and I genuinely believe that it is a result of the footwear that generation have had available to them. He has worn leather, solid, like a proper work type boot, not steel toe, but like a proper solid, rugged leather boot all of his life. And as you say, when you are not utilizing your toes inside those shoes because they're held together all the time, you lose mobility if you're not going to use that muscle. We keep broken arms in casts when they need help healing for a short time, and even after that short time, when you remove that cast, it's very evident how much muscle mass you've lost. So if you're looking at smaller muscles on a smaller scale and you're keeping them in a cast, which you can't deny, that is what modern footwear has become, a nice cushioned keep me still cast, when you're not wearing those shoes, your feet are like, oh, they've lost that muscle, they've lost that movement. And in order for us to regain that movement and that strength and that mobility, we need to start moving again. And that is the beauty of minimal footwear and barefoot shoes, because you get to use that range of motion again. And it can be a bit scary, as you said. That transitional period may be a few days for some people, but it may be a few months for others. And obviously that really depends on, a person's individual circumstances, what shoes they've been wearing, what kind of lifestyle they lead. For me personally, I didn't have a transition period, and I believe that's down to the fact that I'd discovered barefoot shoes as I'd become a mom. I'd been on maternity that whole time. I was always wearing relatively sensible shoes, like with a low heel. Even those with no heels are actually with a heel rise, but luckily I was never one to wear proper chunky heels or anything like that. And I'd got quite wide feet, so I was always steering clear of super narrow shoes. Although I did have a pair of Converse, and I look at them now and think, how is it even humanly possible that I was wearing them? And I think the power of majority influence is so big, and it's so big that we don't even recognize it.
It's social norms, isn't it? It's
Right,
what is seen as socially normal, and it's very hard to make that choice. And I would argue, unless you have something quite significant that leads you there, someone else's experience, your own experience. For me, as you know, as my audience knows, that was about me being in pain. I was searching for anything to help me not be in pain. So I was trying absolutely everything, and I had already heard about it, and my husband had tried it, and my best friend had tried it, and I'd laughed at them.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and poo-pooed it. And then I was like, do you know what on earth was I thinking? And like you, I didn't have a transition time, mainly I think because I used to love, we are in a barefoot, literally no shoes house, and I don't think that's the case for everyone.
No.
And therefore I've always been very used to walking around and love to be barefoot. And particularly as when I was wearing more traditional shoes, I would want to get those things off my feet by the time I got home. And what a sign is that
Exactly,
to
but
us?
people don't actually, they don't accept and don't acknowledge that that is a sign. And the other thing
Or
is,
they may not know there's another option.
well, yes, that's that, you see. But then when you realise that there is another option, you start to go, oh yeah, my feet do like, behave like
Yeah.
that. But a lot of comments that I receive on my social media are from people saying, well, I'm such and such age and my feet are fine. And I'm like, well, I'd actually argue, are your feet fine? Because I believed my feet were fine. I didn't have
Yeah.
foot pain. I didn't have any problems. But then if you dig a little deeper, the problems, I just masked them, because either I wasn't willing to admit that I had a little niggle, and that niggle could be as small as when you get through the door after a day of work and you whip off your shoes, and that relief, it actually feels positive in the moment, but really your feet are telling you, we didn't like that.
Yeah.
But everyone wears shoes, so I'm not going to admit that I've got a problem, because everyone wears shoes. So I'm not going to say, I can't blame my shoes, right? But actually, footwear is the problem. And another little niggle that I had, which I was managing, I was absolutely managing it, and I wasn't willing to admit that it was a problem, was ingrown toenails. Because my mum would say that it's just don't cut them too short, but actually you can have normal cut nails in barefoot shoes, and immediately the issue of ingrown toenails is completely diminished, because no longer are your toes rubbing together all
Squashed.
day. They're not squashed anymore. They actually have that space, an ample space between them, to stay away from each other and not rub the skin on either side. And lots of people tell me, well, I can wiggle my toes in my shoes and they're fine. And I'm like, yeah, but when you're moving, when you're taking each step, your toes need to actually move away from each other and splay out. And the way you can test that is by taking your shoes and socks off and going up the stairs and watch and deeply feel what your toes are doing. And if you're not able to achieve that range of motion in your footwear, you are going to have mobility issues.
And I would also say, when the person said to you, there's nothing wrong with my feet, I would then ask the question, but what about the rest of your body? Because again, it's there's been a lot of restriction around thinking about the fact that this is a foot only issue. It's not. It's absolutely about all the mechanics from then on up. I hope you're enjoying the conversation. I'm just taking a quick break to ask you a question. Have you started to notice that the everyday things you used to do without thinking, like getting up off the floor, lifting the shopping, or hopping over a stile, now take more effort than you feel they should? Well, if your answer is yes, you are far from alone. And I'm excited to tell you that I've written a book to help you. It's called Move Well for Life, Unlock the Life-Changing Power of Everyday Movement. As you'll know from listening to this podcast or following me online, I don't talk about chasing fitness trends or imposing rigid routines. Instead, my message is all about learning how small, natural movements woven into your daily life can help you feel stronger, more confident, and ready for whatever life throws at you. Move Well for Life is available to pre-order now, and it's out in January here in the UK and Europe, and later next year in America. You can find the link in the show notes to read more about it, or simply search Move Well for Life and Wendy online. I firmly believe that every movement counts, and it's never too late to reclaim yours. Now, back to the episode. I'm conscious that we have made an assumption in this podcast, and that is that people all know exactly what how different a barefoot shoe is to a normal shoe. And we haven't really clarified that. I have had a previous podcast guest on, so I'm assuming people have listened, and I shouldn't, which was Andy Bryant, podiatrist, who I know you know really well. And he explained it then, but I think let's just do a quick whip through the key points of barefoot, and hopefully the audience will say, yeah, thank you.
Sorry that it's taken this long. So barefoot shoe is, they have 5 main attributes, and they could be different brands for different people, because shoes come in all different shapes and sizes, because feet come in all different shapes and sizes. But in essence, a barefoot shoe needs to be shaped like a foot. If you nip down to your high street this afternoon, you will actually observe that the footwear available to us in the mainstream is not actually shaped like an anatomical human foot. They are all very tapered. They all have a strange point. Even if it's rounded, the edges of the shoe come in at the sides, at the top, and they hold our toes together. But a natural human foot actually does widen out towards the toe, no matter what shape your feet are.
Yes.
Whether you've got Egyptian feet, Roman feet, and that we could do a whole other episode about foot shapes. But essentially, the widest part of your foot should be across your toes. But if you went and looked at wide feet shoes, wide fit, the actual width of the shoe, the widest part of the shoe is the midfoot, but the toes still should taper in. But all feet, if you look at a newborn baby or a toddler or somebody who has never worn shoes, you will see that the actual width across the top of the foot is the widest part. And so a barefoot shoe needs to adhere to that actual shape. And as I said, which I can touch on again later, there are a very great deal of brands available now in all different shapes, and some fit better.
And can I ask on that? And it has to be wide, but also when the foot contacts the ground, am I right in saying that the toes also need to splay?
Yes.
So it's even wider.
But yes, it is even. It needs to have adequate room for your toes to do their natural job. And obviously, there are so many different brands that all offer different degrees of that. And it's up to a person to go with what that fits them and suits them. But essentially, regular footwear that is holding your toes into a position, and when you're moving, you're getting a little niggle on these knuckles either side, and that's obviously the start of bunions and that pressure and that pain. It can easily be avoided by buying footwear that actually matches your natural foot shape. And maybe your listeners might have actually altered their natural foot shape by a lifetime of wearing regular shoes, just like my father. So when you're looking at barefoot shoes, they might look wildly different to what you're used to, but actually there is hope. And I strongly believe it's never too late to move into more naturally shaped footwear, because you're going to relieve yourself of that pain. You're going to allow yourself to have that increased mobility. and it's just so much more comfortable. And the way I would describe it to anybody that has no idea what I'm talking about, it's like wearing a lovely, comfortable slipper on your feet all day. Like, they're such wonderful and comfortable shoes. But it does go beyond the basic shape. So once you've established that the shoe is shaped like your feet, you also need to have a flat, thin, and flexible sole. And that does sound terrifying to a lot of people. Oh, I can't wear flat shoes because it niggles me here, it niggles me there, it hurts my back. But I will argue that every single flat shoe either isn't really as flat as they're telling you, or it is flat, solid, with a tapered toe. And the relationship between that sole shape and flexibility and flatness and the toe, it all works together. So once you've got adequate room for your toes to splay, and you've got a movable, flexible sole that works with your feet, not against them, you literally open a rabbit hole of movement and mobility. So I hear time and time again, I can't wear flat shoes, because people are only thinking about the flat shoes that have got solid soles with a kitten heel or even just a blocked heel, and it's got an encased, hard and tapered toe box. And that is not what I'm referring to as a flat shoe. That is still a solid, rigid, restrictive shoe. But a natural barefoot shoe is flat, like when you're standing barefoot. It enables you to stand like you've got no shoes on at all. So it doesn't feel like you've got no shoes on. It just lets your feet move like they've got no shoes on. So that, in essence, is a barefoot shoe.
And I would add one thing, which is also shoes, in inverted commas, that have a heel. Not a heel, what do you call it? It goes around the back of your heel, support at the back of the foot. Because a lot of people will say to me, well, I'm fine in flip-flops. They they're really flexible. They allow my foot to move. And obviously they are cheap. They're commonplace all around the world. And yet when you wear them, you're gripping with your toes to hold your foot in that shoe, in inverted commas.
That's right.
Whereas if you get something that has a heel strap, you'll notice everything just relaxes and you can function better again. And there are flip-flop brands that also do, they still may have quite a squishy sole, it is flat, but they do have a heel strap. So if you really want to be wearing that kind of shoe, there are always still options that are, so much better than wearing a flip-flop. And I think if the problem is, again, sensing into, am I actually gripping? And, kids wear sliders a lot. It's the same thing. And Crocs, they're really making you move differently. And I would, we shouldn't be calling out brands that are bad particularly. That's not the right way to do it. It's better to be positive about the good ones. But there's so many shoes where even the sole has, like you were saying before, that the sort of cast where the arch is created by the shoe. So the arch of our foot isn't, as I am aware, it's not a structure. It's several muscles meshing together that when they're healthy are lifted, and therefore if they're permanently leaning on an arch in the shoe, they don't have to do the work. They can just slob out and get inactive.
I actually had a message from a follower recently, and she said, I think it was a comment on a recent TikTok video. She said, I purchased some of the barefoot shoes that you've been talking about in the last few weeks, and I've never had a visible arch, and I've been wearing them now for about 6 weeks, and for the first time in my life, I can actually see a physical difference in my foot shape, because those muscles that have never worked properly because she's always had support have suddenly been free to move. Yeah. And as they've come alive and as they've started to increase their mobility, they've become not tighter, but they've become stronger. Yeah. They're stronger, and she's become more muscly in that area, right? And the way that you can see that is because they've actually lifted. And isn't that incredible?
That is amazing. That is, because also to get that as a sort of a visual before and after, it's like your description of the clumsy child to the child. You know, it's so clear. It's such strong evidence, isn't it, that
It's
it's going to do
a
you good. So
it's a really popular misconception that people with flat feet or low arch need arch support, but actually the opposite, the complete opposite is true. If you continue to support a muscle, it stops functioning, it stops growing, it stops becoming strong, and it weakens. Whereas if you actually allow it, and this is exactly what my father has experienced in his own personal way, that he actually became accepting of, okay, buy me some then. So we got him some free Tundra, which are basically visually a leather look boot, an ankle boot that he's able to wear with all, for all the things that he likes. So it's visually pleasing for him. So we got him in them. And after a few weeks, he was like, there's no point in me wearing my arch support. So he was prescribed arch support when he was about 8 years old. So we're talking
is that
like,
orthotics?
yeah, proper what they're made out of now.
Insole, yeah.
Yeah, like I can't think of it. Anyway,
Is it cork?
Fiberglass No, like a really, really strong material one that's like solid, like a half in the sole of his shoe, and he's worn them for 65 years, right up until about last spring when he started wearing his free walking boots. Which again, I got them because they're just right on his sort of aesthetic level. So he started wearing them, and after a few weeks, he was like, it's kind of pointless wearing my arch support in these. And I was like, yep. And then skip forward now, he's been wearing them for about 18 months and he hasn't worn his arch support. And this is a man who has never gone a day, like he'll wear shoes for 12, 16 hours a day. He would wear them first thing in the morning before he walked to the bathroom, last thing at night, and he keeps his shoes by his bed. That's the kind of person I was dealing with my father. And now he actually wears saguaro in the day. If he's going out, he'll wear his free, and he loves his barefoot shoes now because he's actually realised that his feet are stronger than ever. And I have childhood memories of my dad never being barefoot, always wearing his wool socks with his big hard leather boots on the beach in really hot climates, and he was that man because he was convinced himself that he has sensitive feet, he has flat feet, he needs that support even to toddle to the bathroom in the morning. But he's come full circle in his beliefs now because he's actually had the experience of being able to put barefoot shoes on his feet and feel the difference. And now he's actually recognised that, yes, it's true. Like he was misled to wear those prescribed orthotics all of his life. He didn't need to do that.
No. And that's because, as you say, it's socially normal. It's the common, it's what's available. And what you do, one of the reasons you've become particularly popular for some of your videos and reels are going into kids shops, I believe mainly kids shops, and calling out some of those shops for the shoes that they are providing children, which that's a very strong move, and big respect, because there's not many people who would have the guts to do that. But it's such a useful thing to have that comparison. And obviously you feel really strongly. You've got 4 kids. You came about this because of your children. Tell me a little bit, going back to kids for a moment, tell me a little bit about how that works with them now being of school age, some of them, other parents, the school themselves. I know from our conversation before, you go to quite a lucky school on that front, but also how people communicate with you through your social media about the problems that they find once they decide they are going to try barefoot and schools.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really big topic, and it's something I'm really passionate about. When I go to big high street chains and I look at the shoes, it makes me feel physically sick. And the reason I feel so strongly about it is because I already know that the parents shopping in these places do not know that there's an alternative. We've already talked about in this conversation that we just go with what the social norm is, and we don't question it, and we ignore, to the point of desensitization, what either our bodies or our minds are saying, because we're not willing to go against the norm. So when you're in a mainstream chain store and you've got solid boots or character trainers which you can't move at all, and this is the available option to our parents, it makes me want to scream from the rooftops and go to the NHS and ask them to produce guidance on natural footwear and first footwear, because I think we're all in agreement with podiatrists. And even though Clark's isn't what it used to be, we are all in agreement that babies should have flat, soft, flexible, and wide shoes. But as soon as they get to that sort of school age, it all goes out the window. And my question is, who is it? Where's the research that says as soon as they've stopped that toddling learning to walk phase, why do they need this solid heel, arch support, a tapered toe? I challenge anybody to go to their local high street or local shopping centre and go and look for kids' shoes and look at size 20, 21, 22. I'm speaking EU sizes. Infant size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then when you get to a 6, the shoe becomes massively different in all ways. You've got a heel, you've got arch support, you've got a tapered toe. Why? Why are we imposing that on our children? And I would hedge my bets it's for fashion. So why, oh why, are we dictating what children are wearing based on fashion? So I look at school uniform policies and I challenge any school to a debate on why that child needs to wear winkle pickers in the classroom.
And you were telling me that there's great news on that, in that some brands are starting to bring in close to barefoot shoes for kids. So that's a huge stride forward.
There is a long list, and if anybody wants the list, they can come find me on Instagram, or they don't even have to say hello. They can just type in the word school to a DM for me, and I will automatically send them the long list of available options for young boys, young girls, older boys, older girls. There are loads of options now, and it's very rare that a school would say, hey, we're not happy about this, because there's nothing on a school uniform policy that would deny the option of a foot-shaped shoe. And if anyone ever in the world would challenge that, I am ready to back them.
I bet you are.
No one would be able to argue that a solid tapered shoe would be ever any better for anybody than a foot-shaped shoe of a similar design with the same materials. And they are obviously, of course, puncture proof. You're not going to step on a drawing pin and have a problem with. And the other thing is, I feel obliged to mention that barefoot shoes is an umbrella term, and in that umbrella you have minimal footwear, and you can still have a maximal looking aesthetic shoe made from more bulkier, heavier materials, but it can still adhere to the properties of barefoot shoes that we discussed earlier. So you don't have to go and buy a thin baby leather bootie for it to be a barefoot shoe. They are actually starting to look far more like normal shoes now, and gosh, there's brands working tirelessly to bring more aesthetically pleasing options, which would absolutely adhere to school uniform policies. But there's plenty of options now.
Yeah, and quite frankly, if the school did say anything, then I'd love to set you on them.
Absolutely. Record an interview with any school. Like, I've actually written templates for people before that challenge a school uniform policy. But to be honest with you, if there's a parent listening with that as a concern of theirs, the best thing to do is just not mention it. Just buy the shoes, send them to school. No one's ever going to bat an eyelid.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And then the same goes for adults, because a lot of the reason that is sadly the case that people don't understand why barefoot is better, and hopefully we've covered a lot of that today, but also they don't know what options there are. And I get people, there are so many options. And even in the time that I've been wearing barefoot, which is about 7-8 years now, the market has exploded, and it's wonderful. And there's so many people around that are looking and sort of testing out shoes and so on. And your page is great at sharing information. So you don't work for a particular brand. You are testing out shoes and recommending them and listening to what people say about those shoes, which is even more important. Yeah. And what I would say is what you were just saying there about there being options that are not as minimal, which is something
Yeah.
that people fear, particularly if their feet have become incredibly sensitive over the years of being barefoot. And so transitioning doesn't just need to be small amounts of time in a really minimal
So
shoe.
they can
It
literally
can
get
be
transitional.
transitional shoes. And I've certainly learned a lot more about that in the last couple of years. We've had a discussion, and there's some great brands out there that are actually providing transitional shoes, aren't there? And
Yeah.
that's not just for living, it's also for sport,
Yeah.
which I would argue is almost even more important, for example, for runners, because you're putting so much impact through a structure that's going to struggle if it's restricted.
Yeah.
So would you be happy to share a few names of brands? Are you all right to do that, to sort of talk about that sort of transitional side of things? Because I think
Absolutely.
that would be really useful.
So the first one that springs to mind is Bilenka. Bilenka is from Slovakia. I was actually in their offices a couple of weeks ago. I kind of went to sort of increase buying confidence, because I think people can be a bit frightened about buying from overseas. But I'm really great friends with the team at Bilenka now. They've got a lovely office. They were really hospitable with me when I went, and they've actually just recently launched what they've called their recovery range. So it would be really ideal for your listeners, especially those that are worried about that zero drop flat sole. If they've been wearing something like Skechers or other brands that have got quite a considerable drop, then the recovery shoe from Bilenka is a fantastic option, because it has all of the properties of a barefoot shoe. It's more minimal than that they were expecting, but it doesn't look so drastic, and it also still has a slight rise in it with some cushioning. So there's quite a few options in that range, different colour choices. And anyone listening, if they want some help with choosing, then they can come and ask me. I always give one-to-one advice. That is something I'm really happy to do. But if somebody's ready for that zero drop, but they're still not willing to let go of the cushioning, for example, like that's probably where I would go personally, because I'm just not a huge fan of a heel rise, because I strongly believe in that natural posture. So if somebody's ready for the zero drop, but they're not quite ready to feel everything through the floor, then again, there are loads of options. We talked about Bahay earlier. So Bahay are a British company making grounding trainers. So there's an additional benefit there with that range. And then there's somewhere like Freet. Freet are making hiking shoes. They are, again, not the most minimal option. They actually have quite a few sole options. And then lastly, there's a brand in America making very Vans like street style, skate style aesthetic for maybe a younger audience. And they have a couple of running options as well. But I also have
What's the name of that one?
Splay, and they're
Splay.
from far in the States. And yeah, I mean, I could literally talk to you all day about various options, even for people, women who want to look smart in like a formal office environment, because there are a lot of brands that have got quite a big segment of the market that are very lifestyle, very active, and very outdoorsy. But there
Mm.
are actually hundreds of brands now making something a little bit more formal, something to wear to a wedding, something to wear to work, as well as hundreds and thousands of children's options.
And arguably for women particularly, that's the reason that you had this huge range of shoes, because you had the shoe to fit the occasion often.
Yeah,
And certainly when I started wearing barefoot shoes 7 years ago, I did struggle to find things that would work for those times and events. And interestingly, I still have lots of my old shoes in my cupboard. I think that's just because I'm a bit useless at decluttering, but but I will never wear them again, because it's a bit like when I look at loads of sort of pastries and things. If I go into Costa, I'm like I just look at bloating and discomfort now.
yeah.
And it's the same with the shoes. I look at the heels, or I see someone in heels, and I look at their posture and their back, and all I see is pain. So
I
it's
see
easy. I'm
people.
easily put off.
Absolutely. And when you see people walking in, I like to think, what did they think when they put that shoe on? They probably chose it because it's a low heel and it's a comfortable shoe. But I'm seeing them walking and I'm thinking, I just wish I could tell everyone, going back to that screaming from the rooftops, like I just wish I could tell everyone that there are so many better options out there, and there really are. And that's kind of exactly what I'm doing. I am literally I'm highlighting the flaws of mainstream footwear, and I'm therefore giving you options. Like there is a whole world out there of comfortable shoes that I cannot wait to introduce you to. So if
And
you want more, come find.
yes, absolutely. Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up, because that's most people's issues are awareness at
Yeah,
all.
absolutely.
And that's why, for example, me talking about it on my podcast about movement, how important and critical your footwear is to movement, the connection might not have been made before, and yet to me it's vital. And when I work with clients, I start to slowly seep in the messages as we work. It's not something that I ram in at the beginning, because people do need that sort of mental adjustment time to be convinced,
Yeah,
and as you say, to get over the look of the shoe. But there are, as you have also said, there's so many great options now that are not so sort of clumpy looking, and the problem always then has been, well, how do I find out about them? So
hmm
that's where you come in, which is
yeah.
fantastic and really, really useful. So I urge everyone listening to go and find Barefoot Brit on Instagram. It's the same on TikTok, isn't it?
Barefoot Brit on TikTok, Barefoot Brit official on Instagram,
Official.
and I'm
That's it.
also on Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, if people don't use social media and they're listening to the podcast and they want to get in touch, I also offer one-to-one email service as well. So I get back to you within a few couple of days with some options. And I'll just plug as well, on my website at the moment we have a very brand new early days feature which is absolutely incredible. So go to barefootbrit.co.uk and click on Barefoot Calculator in the top menu, and there you'll be able to put in some basic information such as your foot length, foot width, shape and volume if you're aware, and then it will instantly give you some examples of great options for you. And
Brilliant.
click through, utilize my discount codes, and it's all there. And it's a fantastic, very, very amazing bit of kit there, because it actually stops me from going, right, how can I
Yeah.
help this person? But it's all, I've been feeding this data set of all of the information I've picked up over the last 8 years of the industry. I've worked with brands to input their information about their actual shoes, and so it's like the Harry Potter sorting hat of the barefoot shoe world.
That's amazing. What?
It
That's
really is amazing. I'm really excited
I'm
about
going to go and have a play. That sounds
it.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Really good. So your website again was?
Barefootbrit.co.uk, and then if they want to use that tool, it's Barefoot Calculator at the top, in the top menu.
And I presume you've got a contact form on there. So if someone wants to
Yeah,
email you, they can just come straight through the website rather than having to remember your email. Perfect.
absolutely.
Britt, it's been a real pleasure. So fascinating. You're clearly hugely passionate, and I was really excited to get you on. And I haven't mentioned that partly I came across you because of your incredible expo that you did this year. So I just want to say massive congratulations on that. Anyone listening, if you get into this world and you want to roll with it, then it's happening again next year. Approximately
October,
when?
October 2026 again. Come join me on my socials,
I will
or
be there.
join the mailing list. I will be announcing the date hopefully by the end of this month, and inviting some lovely brands again, because we had 30 this September, and I'm hoping to at least double that for next year. It's going to
And
be
the best thing about that is then you get to speak to the brands, you get to play with the shoes, you get to make real true comparisons, which is exactly it's like a little high street, isn't it, for barefoot shoes?
It's a family friendly, really exciting event, and so yeah, please do get involved.
Superb. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.